The IV had been in my arm for 6 hours when my husband walked out of the hospital room without saying goodbye. Not to the nurses, not to me, not to the baby they'd just placed on my chest. I heard the door close. I didn't look up. I just kept staring at the top of my daughter's head, at the dark, wet swirl of hair pressed against my skin, and I thought, so that's what that feels like. Her name was already decided, Ivy. We'd agreed on it in the second trimester, lying in bed one Sunday morning with the window open and the coffee going cold on the nightstand. He'd said it first, actually, Ivy, like something that grows on old stone. I'd loved that. I'd loved him for saying it like that. 3 days later, I was in my mother's guest room with a duffel bag, a newborn, and a text message that said, I need some space to figure things out. I'll be in touch. He was not in touch. My mother didn't say much the first week. She just showed up in the doorway every few hours with water, with soup, with a clean onesie she'd already warmed in the dryer. She'd lost my father when I was 11, and she had a particular economy of words around grief. She knew when to be quiet and when to put her hand on your shoulder. She was very good at both. I wasn't good at anything those first weeks. I couldn't sleep more than 40 minutes at a stretch. I cried at things that weren't sad. The sound of a garbage truck, a commercial for paper towels, the way the afternoon light moved across the wall. My body felt like a house that had been vacated too quickly, like someone had walked out and left all the lights on. Ivy was small, 7 pounds 2 ounces, which the nurses said was perfect, but she seemed impossibly small to me. I kept checking that she was breathing. I'd put my hand on her chest at 3 in the morning, in the dark, just to feel the rise and fall of it. My mother-in-law called once 3 weeks after. She was apologetic in that way some people are when they've already decided they're not going to do anything. She said she was sorry. She said her son was going through something. She said she hoped I was doing okay. I told her I was fine and got off the phone as fast as I could. I didn't hear from him again for 9 weeks. When I did, it was a voicemail, and he sounded like a stranger, careful, rehearsed. He was seeing someone. He thought it was better, to be honest. He hoped we could work out something civil for the sake of the baby. I sat on the edge of my mother's bed and listened to the whole message twice. Then I put my phone face down on the mattress and went to feed Ivy, because she was awake and she needed me, and that was something I actually knew how to do. I want to be honest about what I decided in those months, because I think people expect a story like this to be about rage, about revenge, about some clean narrative where the woman scorned rises up and makes everything right. That's not exactly what happened. Or maybe it is, but it was slower and stranger than that, and it started from a place I'm not entirely proud of. What I decided was this: I was not going to be poor. That might sound simple. It might even sound petty. But I had grown up watching my mother recalculate every grocery trip, every school supply list, every car repair. She'd done it gracefully, but I had watched her do it, and I knew the particular exhaustion of that math. The way it occupies a corner of your brain permanently. The way it changes what you let yourself want. I had a degree in accounting, I had 6 years of corporate finance experience, and I had a daughter who was going to need things. A good school, a stable home, a mother who wasn't running on fumes and anxiety. I made a list one night after midnight with Ivy asleep on my chest. It was a practical list. What I needed, what I could build, who might actually help. That was how I came to think about my father-in-law. His name was Lawrence. He was 63 years old, semi-retired, and one of the most quietly formidable people I had ever sat across a dinner table from. He'd built a regional logistics company over 30 years, sold it at the right moment, and pivoted into commercial real estate with the methodical patience of someone who had learned to wait out markets the way other people wait out weather. He and his son had been estranged for almost 2 years, something to do with money, or expectations, or the particular disappointment fathers have when sons don't become what they imagined. I didn't know the details. My husband had never talked about it, which I'd always found more telling than whatever the actual story was. Lawrence had sent a gift when Ivy was born. A card, a savings bond, and a note in handwriting that was deliberate and slightly formal. Congratulations on the arrival of your daughter. She is lucky to have you. Not us, not the family, just you. I'd read that note a lot of times. I called him on a Tuesday afternoon in October when Ivy was just past 3 months old, and I had decided to stop waiting for something to happen to me and start making things happen instead. I don't remember exactly what I said. Something about wanting to talk, about having a proposal, about knowing his time was valuable. He was quiet for a long moment after I finished. Then he said, "Come to the office Thursday, 11 o'clock." His office was in a building he owned in the west side of downtown, one of those mid-century buildings that had been renovated exactly well enough to look intentional rather than dated. The lobby had marble floors and good lighting, and a receptionist who knew who I was before I gave my name. He met me himself at the elevator, which I hadn't expected. He was taller than I remembered. He shook my hand. The conference room smelled like coffee and leather and faintly like a legal pad. He sat across from me and said nothing for a moment, just looked at me with the same level attention he probably gave everything he considered worth his time. I had prepared. I had a folder, a brief 3 pages of clean numbers. I slid it across the table and said, "I'm not here to ask you for money. I'm here to tell you what I can do and why it's worth something to you." He opened the folder. He read it. He did not rush. "You put this together yourself," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "The projections on the Meridian property are conservative deliberately," I said. "I'd rather beat the number than defend it." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he almost smiled, not a full smile, just a slight shift at the corner of his mouth. "Your husband," he said, "is an idiot." I said, "I know." I went to work for Lawrence 3 weeks later as a consultant on a series of property acquisitions he was making in the southeastern corridor. It was contract work at first, structured carefully by his attorneys and mine, because he was a man who understood that informal arrangements have a way of becoming complicated. I worked from my mother's dining room table for the first 6 months, with Ivy in a bouncer at my feet and my laptop open and my coffee always going cold. I was good at it. I had always been good at numbers, but I was especially good at finding the thing other people missed. The property tax anomaly, the zoning variance that hadn't been updated, the comparable sale that skewed the whole valuation. Lawrence noticed. He didn't say so often, but when he did, he was specific, and specificity from a man like that meant more than any amount of general praise. We had lunch every few weeks. He'd call on a Wednesday and say, "Thursday, that Italian place on Forsyth," and I'd arrange for my mother to have Ivy, and I'd show up and we'd spend 2 hours talking about real estate and occasionally other things. He asked about Ivy sometimes. He asked once about my mother, whether she was well, whether she was managing. He never asked about his son, neither did I. My husband, my ex-husband technically, since the divorce had finalized quietly in the spring, called twice during this period. Once to discuss a modification to the support arrangement, which his attorney handled through mine. Once, inexplicably, at 11 on a Saturday night, and when I didn't answer, he didn't leave a message. I didn't call back. I had stopped being angry at him somewhere around Ivy's first birthday. Not forgiven, that wasn't the right word. More like set down, like I'd been carrying something heavy for a long time, and one day I just put it on the ground and walked away from it. He had made his choices, I had made mine. The weight of his choices was his to carry. What I was building had nothing to do with him. Ivy was 2.5 when Lawrence asked me to come on full-time. By that point, I had moved us into our own apartment, a 2-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood with good schools and a park 3 blocks away. I had furnished itself, piece by piece, from a budget I'd built and stuck to. The couch took 4 months to save for. I didn't mind. Ivy had a room with yellow walls and a bookshelf I'd assembled on a Sunday afternoon while she napped, and when she woke up she looked at it and said books like she was naming something she'd been waiting for. The full-time offer came with an equity stake, a small one, carefully structured, with a vesting schedule and conditions. I had my own attorney review it. Lawrence expected that. He'd said so. "In fact, before I signed anything, you should have someone look at this. Don't trust me because you like me." I like that he said that. I said yes. The work expanded. I was managing acquisitions now, overseeing a team of 3 analysts, traveling occasionally to walk properties myself. I'd gotten good at reading a building the way you read a face, what it showed you, what it was trying to hide, what the bones said underneath the surface presentation. Lawrence trusted my read. He didn't always agree with me, but he's listened, and when I was right, he said so. We had a rhythm. I knew how he thought. He knew how I worked. There was a version of this that could have been strange, a woman, 31, working closely with her estranged former father-in-law, but it wasn't strange, maybe because neither of us treated it like it was. We were two people who were good at the same kind of work and who had, through an unlikely series of events, found each other professionally. That was the whole story, and we both understood that. He talked about Ivy sometimes as he'd started keeping a photo on his desk, one she'd given him at Christmas, a drawing she'd made with crayons, mostly purple, that was supposed to be a horse but looked more like a rectangle with feelings. He kept it next to the good things, his late wife's photograph. A deal memo from his first acquisition framed Ivy's purple horse. I didn't say anything about it, but I noticed. My ex-husband reached out in March, 18 months after the divorce was final. He called my cell phone on a Tuesday afternoon and I almost didn't answer. But I did, because Ivy was at preschool and I was in the car and I was in that particular moment, feeling too settled to be afraid of whatever it was. He sounded different, quieter than I remembered. The manufactured easiness was gone. He said he'd been thinking a lot. He said he'd been talking to someone, a therapist, he clarified as if I'd asked. He said he knew he'd handled everything badly. He said he wanted to be part of Ivy's life. He wanted to make things right. I sat in the parking garage for a while after I hung up. I hadn't agreed to anything. I'd said I would think about it, which was the truth. I was going to think about it. But I knew something sitting there in that parking garage that I hadn't known 2.5 years ago in my mother's guest room. I knew what I was worth now, not in a self-help book way. In a very literal, concrete, I have built this with my own hands way. I had a career, I had a home, I had a daughter who was funny and fierce and said actually before every sentence like a tiny attorney. I had a professional relationship with a man who had quietly, over 3 years, come to rely on me and trust me and tell me things he didn't tell other people. I had not built any of that for my ex-husband's benefit. I hadn't even built it for revenge, really. Revenge is too active a word for what I'd done. I'd just built it for us. For Ivy and for me. Whatever he wanted to make right, he was going to have to do it on our terms, Ivy's terms. Because I was her mother and I was the one who had been here every single day, and I was not going to pretend otherwise. The board meeting was in September. Lawrence had been restructuring the holding company, the one that housed the real estate portfolio, the foundation, several minority investments. It was a significant change, one that had been in planning for over a year, and it involved bringing in outside board members and formalizing a lot of things that had been run on handshakes and institutional memory. I'd been part of the planning process. I knew the numbers better than anyone in that room except Lawrence himself. What I didn't know, until 45 minutes before the meeting, was that my ex-husband would be in the building. His attorney had apparently reached out to Lawrence's office the week before. Something about a claim to involvement in the family holdings, some argument about inherited interest, a lot of legal language that I'm told amounted to very little when Lawrence's general counsel looked at it. But he'd apparently pushed for an in-person meeting and someone had scheduled it for the same day, and I suspect Lawrence had done that deliberately, though I didn't ask. I found out because I walked into the lobby and there he was. He looked the same and it looked completely different. He'd put on weight, not badly, just differently, the kind of weight that comes from settling into your 30s after a period of motion. He was wearing a jacket I didn't recognize. He had a different haircut. He looked, if I'm honest, like someone who had spent 2.5 years making different kinds of mistakes from the ones he'd made with me. He saw me at the same moment I saw him. I watched him understand in real time what he was looking at. Not the woman who'd been sitting in a hospital room with an IV in her arm and no plan and nowhere to go. Not the woman he'd sent a careful voicemail to from a safe distance. He was looking at someone who had a visitor badge that said authorized on it, who was carrying a portfolio and a cup of coffee, who had been in this building enough times that the receptionist knew her name and her order. He said, "I didn't know you were." I said, "I know." I didn't stop walking. The board meeting lasted 3 hours. I presented the Q3 performance summary and the acquisition projections for the following year. I answered questions. I had answers for every question. Afterward, Lawrence walked me to the elevator, which he didn't usually do. He said, "You did well." I said, "Thank you." He said, "I told him this morning, before the other meeting, that you were an equity partner in the holding company, that the restructuring was partially your work." He paused. I thought he should understand what he walked away from. I didn't say anything for a moment. The elevator came. I held the door. Did it bother you, he asked, his being here? I thought about it honestly. The way he'd looked when he saw me, the way the recognition moved across his face, not just of me, but of what I had become, what I had built, what he had absolutely nothing to do with. No, I said. And I meant it. Not the way it would have. Lawrence nodded. He put his hand on my shoulder briefly, the way a father might, and then he stepped back. Go home to your daughter, he said. I drove home through afternoon traffic, with the radio off. I picked Ivy up from my mother's house, and she ran to me at the door the way she always did, both arms out, full speed, like the whole point of the day was this moment. I caught her and held her and felt her solid small weight against me. She smelled like the outside, like grass and something sweet she'd probably eaten too much of. She pulled back and looked at my face the way children do, completely, without self-consciousness, like reading is just looking very carefully. Then she said, Mama, you look happy. I kissed the top of her head. I am, I said. Let's go home.